Good morning, campers, and welcome to Radio Camp Half-Blood, a Percy Jackson read-along podcast. I'm B,
And I'm Zach.
and this week we read Chapter 5 of The Battle of the Labyrinth, Nico Buys Happy Meals for the Dead.
But B, did he supersize it this week?
Can you supersize Happy Meals?
Oh, no.
Is that a thing? I don't think you can. I feel like there would be a lot of backlash.
I don't think you can supersize anything
you
ever
can't
more.
supersize anything because of, that movie that made it really taboo to supersize things. And anyway, let's not get started on that. I had to watch that movie in health class.
I had to watch it for sex ed class. I don't know why.
Yeah, I guess it was your health class, sort of, and they're like, health, this is sort of related. I don't know, it's the last day of class, just watch this Morgan Spurlock garbage.
You see, your body's all changing and things, so this is why you guys shouldn't eat McDonald's. Like, what?
A very tenuously connected sort of health thing.
But, yeah, so this week, we talked all about Nico. This was a really big Nico chapter, as well as a dream sequence chapter.
Yeah, well, we get to see him again.
Yes, we do get to see him in all of his emo kid glory.
We're also probably going to talk a little bit about Interruptus.
Oh no, not Interruptus, my old arch enemy.
Because, yeah, you sent me some fan art that we had received of Interruptus, our OC, I guess. At this point, he's our OC.
We have different OCs because we have our gay horse couple. We now have Interruptus.
Yeah, well, Chiron's already a character, but yeah, there's the guy who falls in love with the horse, so that's definitely an OC.
We also have our OC that Rachel Elizabeth Dare is a serial killer, and we just don't know it yet.
I think that's more of a headcanon than an OC, because she's an existing character, but Interruptus is a new character we have incorporated into the Percy Jackson verse, which is a Greek dude who keeps interrupting people, and that definitely features in this chapter. Also, some patented Rick Riordan, like, I have pertinent information, but I'm going to hide it because surely that will work out.
You can't have a Percy Jackson book without an interruption. That's like his quota. It's like Charles Dickens was paid by the word. Well, Rick Riordan's paid by the interruption.
By the interruption, yeah. And it's funny because sometimes it's not an interruption. Sometimes, in this case, it's sort of a combination in this chapter. There's some interruptions. There's also some of, like, Percy withholding information, which is its own kind of... It works similarly in the narrative of being like, well, we could just have an open conversation about all of the information we have about what's happening.
But let's make this as slippery slope as possible. Let's all slide down.
Let's keep all of our information as disparate as we can so we can't connect the dots as easily or something.
I mean, I guess if I were to play devil's advocate for that, kids do hold secrets.
Yeah, that's
if
true.
If you think it's like, I'd rather hold this secret than be punished. But in this situation here, like, this stuff kind of seems imperative to, the fate of the world and Western civilization as we know it.
I don't know if I would hide that, but again, it's hard to say. It's such a hypothetical.
Did I ever tell you the story how I almost burnt down my grandparents' house?
No, you didn't. I think I'd remember.
When I was like 3 or 4, I used to play with matches because, of course, as a kid, and you had parents that smoked cigarettes.
Yeah, I didn't do that because my dad was a firefighter, and if I played with matches, he would have yeeted me out of the house. Just thrown me into the lake.
No, your dad would have shackled me up into the back of your shed where, his ashes are now.
Yeah. Yep. God, so dark.
So pretty much what ended up happening was I was the type of kid that I just had some matches, thought it was so cool to ignite it and throw it up in the air and see what happens. I'm the worst case scenario of a house fire.
Also, why were you so unsupervised at 3?
Well, my grandparents left me alone for a minute. It was that type of thing where I just got them.
It's like, we can't leave you alone for a second.
No, so what ended up happening is I flicked one up onto the rug. It started making a little fire. I was like, oh, this is awesome.
That's not good. That is so very not good.
But then it started to spread. I was like, oh no, this is terrible. There is a happy ending to the story, actually.
Well, you didn't burn to death, so that's the happiest you could hope.
Well, B, I have a big shock for you. The tester and I'm a ghost.
You've been a ghost this whole time.
Yeah, I've been a ghost this entire time.
You've been a little Victorian boy who died in a fire.
Yeah, but what ended up happening was I smothered it out with a pillow as a kid. That's the first thing you do. And I'm like, oh no, there's a huge burn mark on the rug. So what I did was I just sat down on it and I'm going to have to sit here forever. Yeah.
This is where I live now. This is where I keep my shame.
But my grandma like came in and she already had like the Terminator vision on. She was like, Zach's in trouble. And she like looked at it, looked at me, looked at it, looked at me, and I've never played with matches ever since.
She's not required to be that astute to realize that a 3-year-old's trying to hide the fact he was playing with matches, least of which being that you'd be able to smell the smoke. But I'm glad that you didn't die.
No, but it's one of those things. It's the same thing as Percy Jackson is playing with matches, and he may or may not be burning down the rug of the whole world, trying to bring this full circle.
Yeah, but he doesn't share it. Though, again, the example story, you are 3, he is 16, or going to be 16, and it just feels...
He is 15, going on 16.
16? Why don't we set everything on fire and not tell anybody? Yeah, it's... I kind of get that he hides the Nico thing because he feels personally responsible, and it's sort of like this weird shame thing of him being like, oh no, oops, made another villain. Sorry, guys.
Oh no, B, it's Puritan shame. Shame, ring bell. Shame.
Shame. Yeah, I mean, I get that. I think maybe I have to remember also that these books kind of function as like a didactic tool for children in a way of like, hey, you know how sometimes you have the impulse to like hide shameful things from your authority figures? Sometimes that ends up really bad. So maybe don't do that. Like, even though I personally don't relate to Percy's impulse of like hiding something so important, I'm also like, well, I guess kids do that, and it's sort of trying to teach the lesson of how that's a bad idea, probably.
I totally get the idea of like building like morality, because to a kid, like they've not made these mistakes before. Like, for me and you, we've made mistakes probably a lot of times with like withholding information or doing things.
Oh,
like,
on a daily basis.
Not lying to people, but like white lies or things like, oh man, this is gonna help us, but in the end, it doesn't quite help us. It's the real big series finale type of situation where I've lost friends because of small little things like that. But to kids, like they're reading this for the first time and making their mistakes for the very first time. And yes, it's a good thing that Percy Jackson can like withhold information, but he still feels bad about it. But also to an adult reading this is like, this is kind of terrible advice to a kid.
Yeah, I don't think it's advice though. That's the thing. It's like the opposite advice. It's leading by counterexample, I guess, because I don't think the narrative ever goes, Percy's doing the right thing. I think the narrator does, because the narrator is Percy. He's like, oh, well, I like hid this from Chiron for a couple different reasons, and you know, it's uncomfortable. I need to figure it out myself, kind of thing. And it's not necessarily saying he's like doing the right thing. It's just like what a kid would do maybe if they were worried about doing something wrong.
And the funny thing is like we should be like, don't do that. But like if you think about it, if Percy did the exact opposite, this book would become 1,000 times more boring.
Oh yeah, it would be much shorter, I think, if he always shared everything.
Well, it would be much shorter, but also if you're looking at like the character, if you're looking at the character morality chart, that would mean Percy Jackson would have to be like pretty much like lawful good, and he'd have to do everything right and almost by the book. Whereas you have a kid that makes mistakes and isn't necessarily like really good or bad. I mean, yeah, they mean corrupted like Luke, but like here Percy Jackson is acting in a way that a kid would react to these situations. Like, yeah, he would hold information out, but if it's like to an adult like us, we're like, just tell everybody, tell all that stuff. It's like, oh wait, it doesn't work like this, because then there's no drama, nothing can be dramatique.
That's true. Yeah, you need it for like the narrative tension. I understand that. I just like, I guess sometimes I put myself in Percy's shoes and I think back to like when I was that age and how much I lied to authority figures, whether it be my parents or like teachers or something. And I think that maybe it just like reflects on me and like what a kind of like rule follower I tended to be. If I thought the rules were for a good reason, I would tell something, especially if it was like serious and the stakes were very high. But I think maybe we've determined that Percy does have a very specific sense of right and wrong, where he doesn't necessarily share everything because he feels personally responsible to make things right before he tells people, which is kind of like why he feels uncomfortable talking to Chiron about the whole Nico thing.
And that might be his fatal flaw almost, because remember, he relies on his friends, so he's going to protect his friends to a fault, which may or may not be a problem when you have a character like Nico who hates his guts to the point of where I will kill you, soul for a soul, eye for an eye type of situation, Well, we'll get into it with like Nico, but for the majority of this chapter, it's Percy Jackson going to sleep and having horrific nightmares and waking up and having horrific nightmares.
It's so funny because I mentioned this when we first see the weird Nico vision where I was like, "Oh, it's hilarious. Like the one time he doesn't go to sleep and have a weird vision, he just has basically the waking equivalent of a weird vision. Like narratively, it functions the same way of like, oh, I'm seeing this thing happening in another place that's giving me narrative information about like what's happening with these other characters, which is also important because we don't have like an omniscient narrator, so we need that perspective sometimes. And I think it's like a good device of like he has dreams, or in this case, there's also the iris messages. And it's funny that this chapter took both of those things, which I had compared them, and made them back to back. So he has a dream, and then he also has like a weird iris message vision with Nico at the same night. And I'm like, ooh, right before his quest, too. There's a lot going on.
I do enjoy that in Percy Jackson in this series. We have Percy Jackson is our main character, so he gets information in much more unique ways rather than like the Game of Thrones style.
Right, where it just cuts to another person or something.
Yeah, and this isn't really like a spoiler bee, but in Heroes of Olympus, you do have multiple perspectives. Like there's actually like 3 or 4
So that's
narrative
a different,
It's a different narrative style.
Storytelling
Yes.
structure.
But you could easily see that in Percy Jackson where you have the Percy chapter, then the Annabeth chapter, then the Grover chapter, and then you would incorporate like the new side character, which would be like Nico or Luke. But I do enjoy that it's Percy Jackson's story, so everything you see is from him.
Yeah,
so
he has to physically see it somehow or hear it through like the grapevine. Like he might not witness it, but all of the information that the narrator has is like in retrospect of the story. Because we've talked about this. Like it's Percy telling the story, but it's in past tense because he does know what happens just in this book. I'm pretty sure is what the narrator knows.
I really wish there was like a throwaway sentence, kind of like, yeah, so I was started to keep a journal because all half-bloods should keep journals just in case of something.
Like this is his journal or something. Yeah, like that kind of justifies like, wait, why is he telling? And we've talked about this before, like the
First person to third person.
we've also talked about that where it's like, oh, what perspective is this? It is first person.
It's like first person limited with some third person elements that are kind of sprinkled about.
Well, yeah, it's just first person, but it's in retrospect. So it's not like he's telling the story as it's happening.
Well, this isn't like an epistolate, which is a weird fancy word of saying like a journal book type of story.
It could be, though. It reads like that, in some ways.
It could work like that, but I feel like the way it has it structured, like here's a good example within the chapter. In the first sentence, it's like, I decided to go to sleep. Hopefully I didn't have any horrible nightmares. Was I wrong? Yes, I was wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It has that knowledge of stuff that's going to happen, but not knowledge of like what's going to happen way in the future. Like you don't get that sense of the Percy that's speaking as the narrator. Like you don't get the idea of like, and thus we defeated Kronos and Luke. Like there's no like sense of finality in the way he's talking.
Well, it would be like in the pop culture references, like Grover was playing a thing from Hilary Duff. Hilary Duff would later go on to a career of so-and-so and blah, blah, blah. It's like...
No, imagine if he had like these weird asides that are from the perspective of someone years later. That'd be really funny.
Oh, no, I'm thinking of like, it's like the ending of like most like comedy movies where like all the friends come together. The ending of the movie is like, and John went and joined the army and became a colonel.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm thinking more of like the Wonder Years where he just ends it and he's like, and after all those summers at Camp Half-Blood, I still look back with wonder. But yeah, anyway, the way that it's structured makes it so that way you have to be limited by his knowledge at the time, mostly.
And I don't hate that. That's the weird thing about this book series is that it works in this book. I have read series before where you have like the person's like foresees the future. Like they're pretty much like old man Percy's writing the story and it gets annoying because it takes you right out of it. Here it's like, it is like a weird, interesting literary device, but it works here because it's limited to only this book rather than
the whole narrative, because then that would feel like too much of a foregone conclusion. Like, yeah, of course you survive, and like it feels too much like the stakes aren't as high, which that is not as compelling, I guess, if you get the sense that he's going to definitely survive like a long time after the books take place.
I can totally see like in this book, is like Percy Jackson dies, and halfway through the book, it just goes, ugh. Oh, I guess Percy died. Like he's like writing in between things rather than,
You're like, wait
oh,
a second, then how are you telling us this story now? Anyway, I'm writing this from the gates of the underworld. That would be a plot twist and a half, wouldn't it?
good thing they have speech to text.
He's just like talking into his iPhone, like dictating this sad tale, and then a ghost floats by and is like, "Oh, that was your diary? I just thought it was a very long, sad handwritten book."
You know what the funny thing is there's another book series in the Rick Riordan verse where they do something like that, where it's like an audiobook / it's dictated into like text. It's great.
Is it a spoiler at all to tell me what it is?
No, that's just a literary device. It's called the Kane Chronicles. Like the first book opens up pretty much like, oh, this is an audio diary, but we're putting it down as a book because it would be easier than listen to you guys like hearing us scream halfway through this book.
So anyway, yeah, this is a very Percy-centric chapter because it's mostly him and his weird personal experiences with visions, whether it be sleeping or waking visions.
This is where I have come to the conclusion Percy Jackson should just take some medication, just forget the dreams, and just blindfold the entire night and just have a good old jolly night.
His sleep schedule is really just messed up. I feel really bad for him because either he's having the weird like fountain visions or the weird dream visions, and he can at least slash the fountain with Riptide, as we see later in this chapter, but with the visions it's like, what do you do with your brain to stop it from doing that? Like, can you stop giving me these like weird sort of astral projection sort of things in the middle of the night when I'm trying to just rest for like my waking life, which features a lot of like death and drama and fighting off monsters? Can't I sleep? Can't I escape it somehow? I feel kind of bad for him because he really is just constantly immersed in the drama and the conflict of this like specific arc with Kronos and with Luke and with Nico, like all that stuff. He just can't escape it, and even when he goes to sleep he can't escape it.
It's one of those things about being a demigod. You don't want it, but it still happens because every demigod gets it. Though it seems like Percy Jackson has like a weird man crush for Luke because that's like the majority of his dreams. He's like, if you think about it in a weird way, even in this chapter, like even the demons are like have like man crushes on Luke.
That's true. Oh well, I mean, also there's Kelly who has a crush on Luke, which we find, or like that's weird, right? Like the idea of him dating the Empusa. That I found that kind of creepy.
B, don't think about this book too hard when it comes to people liking Luke, because also Kronos likes Luke in like a weird man crush type of way. I mean, I guess it's more like a just of a means.
Yeah, and also in like a weird like apprentice sort of way, like you are my apprentice, you are following my creepy footsteps, which is a whole spooky thing.
And I guess it's like, you're also my tool, but I kind of need you. And I'm going to give you these magical powers because I knew that you fell off a cliff and did all your bones in your body, but you look good now.
Yeah, so we kind of get a little bit more backstory too about how Luke isn't just a broke, crumpled up ball of garbage like he should be.
Even Percy's like, wait a second, he should be dead, but like he looks new, too new.
Well, here, let me read how they introduce Luke. The last time I'd seen him, he'd been broken and unconscious after a nasty fall from Mount Tam. Now he looked perfectly fine, almost too healthy. And then later, the weird conversation that Luke has with Kronos that Percy is overseeing in his dream, Kronos kind of implies that he gave him, I guess, immortality is what he's saying, or like he's impervious. I'm not exactly sure what it extends to, but he can't die or he can't be killed, or it's something like that.
Well, obviously, he got his magical sword when he says, by the power of Grayskull, he becomes Luke Man.
Yeah, so I mean, I knew that it had something to do with Kronos. It just hadn't been made explicit that that was the reason that Luke was fine, because there's no other explanation. He would not have survived that. He was completely destroyed. He was yeeted off a cliff.
Here's always the thing when it comes to villains, like you can like throw them off a cliff, but usually how you kill a villain has been since the dawn of time, like one-on-one personal fighting to the point of where a character is dying in another person's arms. Like that's kind of like the extent of like that's how you know they're dead. Like if you don't see a body and like a charred husk, even then like there's like comic books like they all like retcon stuff like this. That's kind of the problem with like kids books is you can't really kill a kid unless it's something meaningful. Whereas Thalia like kicked him off the ledge, and that really isn't as meaningful as like someone like trying to save Luke and getting Luke's redemption.
Right. It didn't feel narratively like it would make sense for him to die in that moment because you don't get like a big speech with him. His arc hadn't been wrapped up in a way that made sense. So for him to just like fall off a cliff and die when he's been the main villain, or at least one of the villains at least since the end of the first book. So
Rick Riordan isn't technically like George R. R. Martin where like he kills people, but for George R. R. Martin's case, he kills people because it furthers the plot in a different way than just that character's arc. In Percy Jackson, if a character's going to die, let's say like Bianca, it furthers the plot, but also furthers character motivations for other people. Like Nico, like that's the whole reason why he's evil. It actually, furthers the plot in this way, rather than Thalia didn't get anything out of it, Percy didn't get anything out of it, Annabeth didn't get anything out of it. Like there's no closure, if that makes any sense.
yeah, no, I totally get that. Same thing with when you're led to believe that Tyson is dead, and you're like, that no way is he dead. He died in such like a weird anticlimactic way. It doesn't make sense that he'd be dead. So you can kind of guess when a death isn't like permanent. Even like when it comes to Bianca, like there's still like a question as to whether she will be brought back in some way because Nico is raising that question. And right after it happened, I even thought of that. Even before I knew all the stuff about her being the daughter of Hades, like there's so much going on with death and life and resurrection and stuff like that it's not necessarily a final thing, even though it was kind of more of a final thing.
Nico's gonna be like Lazarus. He's gonna be like, hey, come back to life, you spooky Duke sister of mine. Oh no, they're gonna put Bianca in a cave for like 3 days.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean it's sort of biblical too. I mean resurrection is like such a common like narrative device.
But moving on a little bit, kind of like the synopsis of this chapter is pretty much Percy goes to sleep, has a nightmare, Percy Jackson wakes up, has a nightmare, and then he goes on quest.
I feel just so bad for him that he has to deal with all this stuff. I don't know, like I was expecting just one, sort of, like we've talked about this, how like the fountain and the dreams are functioning in the same way. So for him to have them kind of back to back, it feels somewhat redundant, but I think maybe the point is that it's supposed to drive home just how exhausted he is, because I mean, that's like how the chapter starts off, as him being like, oh, well, at least I got a good night's sleep before the quest, right? Wrong. Like that, it's just such a marathon of garbage he has to go through that night, and then has to wake up and go on maybe one of the most dangerous quests anyone has gone on.
This entire chapter is the equivalent of a slide whistle. Boo!
It's like, oh, and you think it was the worst, but it got worse somehow.
Boo! Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy the second dream more than the first dream, because the first dream is pretty much... So Percy Jackson goes to sleep and wakes up in Luke's cabin on the Princess Andromeda. And he's like, ooh, there's a spooky sarcophagus, and there's Luke. And he looks, I guess, hunky, because everyone has a man crush on Luke now for some weird reason.
Yeah, he looks like God-like, I think was the point of the description of him. And also the point being that he looked almost too...
Perfect.
Vital. Like, we mentioned the thing about him looking too good, and then the conversation he has with Kronos about Backbiter, right? That's like the weird sword that can kill everybody. And he says, you pledged yourself to me, Kronos reminded him. You took this sword as proof of your oath. You wanted power, I gave you that. You are now beyond harm. Soon you will rule the world of gods and mortals.
Swear to me. Oh no, it's Batman. This is insane.
It's Batman.
No, yeah, it's the exact same thing. Pretty much Kronos is like, swear to me. I swear to God. I don't know. Swear to me.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, we've talked about this. There's like a bit of a Malfoy vibe emanating from him where he's like, I've pledged to a Dark Lord and now I regret because it's really creepy. But I'm alive still.
This is one of those, again, Harry Potter comparisons that you can make because there is that similarity because, let's face it. Malfoy has like blonde hair. Luke has blonde hair.
They both have the magical Nazi vibe going on.
Yeah,
For sure.
that seems like to be a trend in like this weird period of time, as if like a lot of these books like looked at each other's ideas, like, you know what? Let's run with this a little bit.
They're like, do you know what's creepy? Blonde guys. Let's make them villains.
No, correction, blonde Aryan guys.
Yeah, blonde pale guys who are like, they're handsome but in like a too sort of like racial purity kind of way, and it's very creepy.
It's more handsome in like a 1936 type of way.
Yeah, it's Luke gives me really bad vibes in general. Even when they try to describe how handsome he is, I'm like, is he though?
Everyone has different tastes in men and women and everything in between.
Well, like, you know what I mean though. It's like the whole point is like he's supposed to be like aesthetically like handsome, but also like in an eerie way, I think.
He's supposed to be what I guess was called like classically handsome, I guess, for a teenager. Like he's like chiseled and ripped. He kind of looks like I would imagine in people's heads he looks like young Chris Evans almost, but that's not even like a good thing to say.
Yeah.
But I guess like he also like looks like Surfer Dude, but
not quite a surfer dude anymore. I think he's kind of grown past that, right? Because they even describe his hair looks almost white now. Like
he's preppy.
He's more weird and ethereal looking than he used to be.
I've never understood the train of thought of like people like falling in love with like the bad boys. Like this is like I've never understood it in my life.
Well, he's like, what's his name? He's like Frederick in frickin' The Sound of Music. It's like he's like a Hitler Youth. Like he has that vibe where it's like, oh well, I thought you were cute and we sang a whole 16 going on 17 thing, and now you're very creepy and you're committed to this really spooky fascist cause that I'm not a part of. Like it has very much that vibe.
But yeah, like in The Sound of Music, Frederick's like, go to the mountains, you weird people, go. It's one of those things where like, well, then again, like I could like say all these arguments and stuff, but then I forgot that Tumblr has a whole section for people that fall in love with school shooters, and then like things fall out the window at that point. You're just like, oh yeah, I forgot people are terrible.
I mean, are you talking about Annabeth in the sense that she's like obsessed with Luke? Because I think that's also a little bit different because she knows him of a period.
No, I'm talking about like fans.
Oh, fans. Yeah, that's a whole thing. You need to just really unpack you have something going on where if you're into Luke. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I'm talking about like specifically like I don't understand the appeal of like people like fans, not like in character stuff, but like fan people like falling in love with like the bad boy, like people like Luke who's just like kind of like mentally unstable in a way of like a school shooter, and he's just like I don't see the hunkiness.
Yeah, they have a manifesto. They're a part of a cause. Any kind of villain like that really creeps me out. It's not so much like, a villain that has... I mean, I guess we've talked about how some of his ideology is like a little bit more justified than, say, in comparison to like a Malfoy, where you're like, oh, it's a creepy purity thing or whatever, like the blood purity of wizard. Like that's just crazy. Well, Luke is more motivated by like the dynamic that the gods have with the demigods, and you kind of get the sense that he's kind of right, but
well, he's right
he's
in
taken
certain
it
ways.
too far. Yeah, like exactly. So I could kind of see like having a little bit more empathy towards his specific cause, because especially the first book really focuses on like adjusting to the idea of like you have a parent who's not really a parent, who's not present, and like the whole weird relationship demigods have with gods.
See, the great thing about that in the first book we can talk about easily is that they reveal this at the end. You've gone on the whole adventure. You kind of understand like, hey, things are kind of like a little bit of BS and how there's like a one-sided like love situation here. Then Luke kind of reveals his plan, and at the end you're like, wait a second, this kind of can make some sense. But then you spend more time with Luke throughout the other books, and you're like, wait a second, he's also crazy, and his side is like a one-sided love because he wants to do pretty much the polar opposite. Like kids should get all the love of the adults, and the adults should like be, seen and not heard.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, like Luke his ideology is like hypocritical because he
worships Kronos.
Yeah, he worships Kronos. Exactly. How is that any different than the gods? Like, oh, it's just the Titans. Like the Titans and the god. Like, are they functionally any different as far as the hierarchy? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Theoretically, the gods should technically be better because Kronos pretty much was like a dictator and ate his kids.
Well, Kronos ate one of his children.
He ate all his kids except for Zeus.
He ate all of his kids. Well, except for
Zeus.
Oh, except for Zeus. Oh, right. Well, also no, but also Chiron is Kronos' kid too.
Well, yeah, but that's also like he was just like, I love. You see that horse over there? I love that horse. Would make a.
I love that word.
This is the prequel. This is like grandfather's version.
Is this canon or is this just your projecting?
This is my projected. I'm sure there's actually like a reason. I don't know. Like there's probably a reason why there's like unicorns because a narwhal and a horse fell in love. But I don't have to give you
Why does it always go back to horse love on this podcast?
because horses are majestic.
They're so majestic. Tina, take a deep breath.
Your ass is grass and I'm gonna mow it.
I was just talking with Sarah the other day about an entire book series that's about horse girls because she thinks about them every time she hears us reference horses on the show.
This was a great segment. I went to Barnes and Noble a couple days ago, and there actually is a mystical horse girl fantasy story dealing with Pegasuses.
That should be a bonus episode.
I sent you a picture of it.
I think you sent me a picture of it, but I would like to read it. Well, maybe I wouldn't like to read it. That's a strong word. I would be interested to see.
No, it's morbid curiosity.
Exactly. Yeah. What is the now I'm trying to think of like the horse books that Sarah was talking about with me. It's like, is it Pony Pals? That sounds made up.
I think the reason like we're just so obsessed with this is because like it takes a certain type of personality to be a horse girl, and then they never quite leave that personality, and I love it. It's always
No.
what fascinates me, and that's not even like a mean thing to say. It's kind of
Did I ever tell you about the horse girl who went to my college?
no.
Well, first of all, the first college that I went to before I transferred had it had some sort of like ecological program. So there was like a farm in the center of it with animals, which featured, did it have horses? I think it may have just had like goats and stuff. There was definitely owls. I remember the owls. But regardless, there was this girl who, in every sense of the word, was a horse girl. She had horses. She was obsessed with horses. She rode horses. She drew horses. Her binder had horses. We're talking about a freshman in college also. Like she was there. She was ready. She was obsessed with the whole premise of equestrian tree. That's not the word I'm looking for. Equestrian tree. The whole premise of caring for horses, it was a lot. Separately from this, my sister and I, we were going to different colleges at the time, but we decided to have matching Halloween costumes, or coordinating, I should say. My sister loves cows. She thinks they're very cute, so she dressed as a cow. So my matching costume, of course, was a horse.
Are you guys sure you aren't like the Pines twins?
The Pines. We are the Pines twins. We've determined this. I'm literally Dipper. Like, just Dipper lives and breathes before you. So she was a cow, I was a horse. Can I make it any more obvious?
Of course.
I wore it on Halloween at my school, and what class did I have but the class with the horse girl? And she was like way too excited that I was a horse. She was like, "You're a horse." A horse. And I was like, I'm not actually a horse. Like, I don't know if she understood I wasn't actually a horse.
Now I'm just thinking of like,
but-
this is like a horror movie where like she like pulls out like cubes of sugar.
Yeah, it's like she was gonna skin me or something. There was a vibe. I was like, listen, I'm just dressed as a horse. And like, it was a very low-key horse costume, to say the least. I was wearing just a brown shirt and brown pants and like a tail and some ears and stuff. Like, that was my level of Halloween costume. But she still was like, "You're a horse."
This is like my pitch for like the horror movie. Like she like thinks you're a horse. Like she pulls out like a carrot. Would you like some carrots? How about some sugar cubes?
Yeah, and it's then all of a sudden I'm being stalked by the horse girl. Yeah, I could see that escalating because she just seemed a little bit too hype about it. And I was just like, okay, I'm gonna go now.
She gets too excited when she sees Lisa Frank stuff. Moving on from the obsessed horse girls, we go from obsessed.
Moving on. Can we ever, though?
Oh, we can, because moving on from the obsessed horse girls, we go to the obsessed kid with the weird fixation with golden sarcophaguses. I mean, Luke, I'm so sorry. Luke is a horse guy at heart, which doesn't, I guess that's a cowboy. I guess he He's got his horsey in the back. Horse stock is attached.
He's got Wrangler on his booty. He does not. He's wearing like a toga situation, or like, what's the Greek equivalent? They always say it.
Greek
chiton?
clothes.
Yeah.
Well, he's wearing
got
like
like all white spooky situation, which makes him look even more ancient and weird.
But pretty much like he has to give his fealty to Kronos, and then that's when the Impusa pops in and is like, oh, hey Luke, hey hunky hot stuff.
Who's like his ex, I guess? Kelly is his ex? There's like weird implications that they had like a thing for each other. It's odd, to say the least. I mean, like, yeah, I guess Grover is dating like a dryad, but he's
a mythical creature.
A satyr, so that's less weird somehow. But for a demigod to be like dating an Impusa, that seems odd. I don't know why. It just, a monster and a demigod, like is that a thing?
Like when like they're like cuddling, it's like, babe, could you move your hoof out of the way, please?
Yeah, there's just a lot to unpack there.
And there's nothing, okay, I guess we should say before we get emails, like there isn't anything wrong with that. It's just if you think about it too hard, you go cross-eyed.
Well, because they like fight monsters. Do you don't understand what I'm saying? Like, I get that he's like an ally with a monster, but to like, that's like the equivalent of like, oh yeah, remember when Harry and his friends fought the troll in the dungeon? Well, Hermione's dating the troll now. Like, it just doesn't... Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, that's the level of weird it is.
Well, B, don't hold that against Harry Potter. There's probably a fan fiction written about it somewhere.
Oh, there absolutely is. I have no doubt. I'm just saying, it's still weird.
Hey, Sarah, can you send me that fan fiction? You probably have it on your files.
Yeah, just like scrolling through. Yep. Oh, you mean the one where Hermione has like a 3-book arc dating the troll from the dungeon?
Hermione X Troll, the trilogy.
Yep.
Each one's about 600 pages, and it goes into depth about the first 3 years of Hogwarts.
I mean, if we're being honest, if anybody was going to date a monster, it was going to be Hagrid.
Well, Hagrid pretty much loves everything. He thinks it's all puppy wuppies. So what pretty much ends up happening is Percy's like looking at this weird stuff, and the Impusa's like, our spies have told us they're going on a quest, and we're getting close to something. And wait a second, there's someone here. And they spot Percy's astral projection.
And then it's like a weird jump scare how the dream ends, basically, which is pretty horrifying to be like, and they're here right now, and turns and like lunges at him in the dream, but he's sort of just like this bodiless presence there.
See, it doesn't really work for me like in literary form. It's just like, oh, okay, so we're getting out of this and going to the next transitionary sentence.
It creeped me out, honestly, like imagining it if I was having a dream and then all of a sudden the people in the dream that I was watching passively suddenly sense my presence. Like, that's kind of creepy.
But we get the big piece of information that there's still spies within Camp Half-Blood.
Which, increases our suspicion towards, well, a couple people, mainly Quintus. Well, we'll get to it, because after the weird dream, then he also has the vision of Nico, like, right away. Like, oh my god, like, you can't catch a break.
Like, he wakes up, it's supposed to be the comedic beat of, Tyson's, like, snoring and, like, doing things. Like, he's just asleep and oblivious to all this stuff.
Oh yeah, that's, like, a running thing, too, is that so much happens in this night to poor Percy, and Tyson's just, like, out like a light.
Nighty-night.
Yeah, he doesn't notice anything.
I like the second part of this dream because as he like wakes up, he sees like a little flicker of light and it's the spooky fountain, which why wouldn't you want to have that thing turned off at night? Like there's no mystical like airplane mode on the fountain. You can't just like swipe up, hit the airplane icon and you're like, oh man, pleasant dreams.
Yeah. Please disable your iris message fountains as we reach our descent.
B, the equivalent of that would probably be like a mobile, like iris message would just be like a squirt bottle or like a mister machine.
Yeah, basically, one of those spray bottles. You just keep spraying it. Oh my god, I just realized it would be a vape. It would be a vape.
No, vapes wouldn't work, I don't think. That's a different type of magic.
It's a different type of magic.
But I do like the second dream because Percy like looks at the iris message and he doesn't have to like even pay for it. It just goes, find me Nico.
But let's not question that, right? I mean, he even says, I didn't even throw a coin in, But this time it didn't matter. It was like some other force had control of the water besides Iris, the messenger goddess. All right, well, I guess who cares who's summoning these things? You don't even want to analyze that just a little bit? Like, who could be doing that?
It's a bit of wish fulfillment in a way where it's like, we're gonna break the rules a little bit, but I need to explain it. That's once again, that's why I love Rick Riordan. Like, yeah, it's like, Iris has all these Iris messages, but I guess other people can do things, and you don't have to fill in like that's not a plot hole. It's like he actually even comments on it, so it's self understanding. Like, wait a second.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's not a plot hole because it still somewhat fits in with the world building if there is an explanation for why someone is controlling the iris message, which I imagine there must be. I feel like eventually, whether it's this book or the next book or whatever, there's going to be some sort of reveal as to why the fountain is working by itself. Whether it could just be literally Poseidon or something like that, because again, it's water. He's a water god.
The Iris messages are coming from inside the house.
Yeah, exactly. They just turn and it's just like Poseidon on like a mobile phone, just like, what? Oh, I'm just, it's fine. I gotta go.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
It actually would be kind of that situation. So yeah, I'm suspecting it has something to do with Poseidon, but it could be someone else. I don't know.
Well, it could be Broseidon. He's trying to help out his bro Percy.
Wouldn't Broseidon be Tyson? Because it's his bro.
Yeah, I guess there's that one too, but Broseidon's god of the Brocian.
The thing is, Poseidon is god of the Brocian because he's kind of like a broy, like, surfer dude a little bit.
No, he's more like Jimmy Buffett, if Jimmy Buffett had god powers. So we've had this conversation before.
Yeah, he's more of a Jimmy Buffett, you're right.
It's time to go down to Margaritaville, Percy. I can't drink.
But the Jimmy Buffetts of the world are just the grandfathers of what we know as bros. They're all sort of connected by the same DNA of wanting to wear sandals in places where it's not appropriate.
And cargo shorts and Tommy Bahama shirts.
Yes, yeah.
And also they have to listen to the sound of their people. Let's go surfing now.
Is that a Beach Boys reference?
Yeah, you have to hear it in the wind. You have to hear the Beach Boys reference. In between the waves, brah.
Bruh.
But I do like the scene where they have Nico in the spooky cemetery right next to the River of Styx.
This was creepy. Yeah.
Once again, I think Rick Riordan nails like spooky, scary stuff to a kid. This is horrific because he like summons undead people, and when he hates them, they just dissolve and they crumble to dust. The spooky skeletons. I love all that. Like Nico.
Yeah, Nico's changed a lot as a person. I feel like every time we see him, he's just a touch creepier.
You just hear in the background Linkin Park playing at this point. Like it's almost like a comedy shot, like in like a Zucker Brothers movie, like Airplane, where you cut to Percy's like happy-go-lucky, and then you cut to Nico, and he's just progressively more emo.
Yeah, basically, he's always becoming more emo, which is funny because they describe Luke as wearing all white, and in this in this Nico is wearing a black cloak. So they kind of both have like weird
symbolism
garments that aren't. Yeah, I sense a bit of symbolism. I also sense a bit of like they're recalling back to their history, sort of like they're not wearing modern clothes, either of them. They're not wearing like a t-shirt and jeans. They're wearing cloaks and chitons and stuff. Like that's not something that a normal teenager would wear.
I like the juxtaposition that Rick Riordan does here. Is like you have all the like these traditional Greek clothing, but then like Nico throws Happy Meals and Diet Cokes on the ground instead of like traditional animal blood.
Yeah, it's like set up so spooky and old-timey, like you feel, oh right, yeah, this is connected to like ancient Greek traditions, and all of a sudden he's pouring like soda and fast food into like a grave. So it's a intentional juxtaposition, which I think feels very Rick Riordan because of his specific brand of like modern fantasy.
See, that's what I love about the comedy of Percy Jackson's. You have things like this where it can be spooky, scary, but then like it's not like absurd when you see something like Nico putting Diet Coke or throwing a Happy Meal onto the grave.
It's still also creepy, which is funny. It kind of goes on this weird arc where you're introduced to Nico again. You see he's dressed in black cloaks. He's next to a grave that's being dug by some skeletons. The ghost that we saw previously in the other Iris message is still there. There's just like the whole set dressing of it is very creepy and feels very like archaic and like ancient, and then you see him take out the Happy Meals and the Coke, and you think, oh, this is kind of funny, like the juxtaposition of this. But then he all of a sudden summons all of these dead people, and it's creepy again. You're like, oh, well, this is kind of absurd, but then it cycles back to creepy.
And the cool thing about this is actually a fun thing that I was thinking about while reading this chapter is, once again, we've always had like this weird thing in Percy Jackson where the parents' personalities mimic their kids, and you have the exact same thing here with Hades. Nico's pretty much almost the exact same way. Like, he's still kind of honorable. We're like, hey, I have to still follow tradition. I'm still gonna ask them and ask them politely. Where you have Percy, who is more like, he just wants to get to the point, and much like a wave, like he just wants to crash into everything and destroy. And then you have Thalia in the last book, where she was like, I'm right about everything, and I have a very big personality, and I can be very theatrical at times.
Because she's like Zeus. Yeah, I get it. It makes sense that they're trying to connect, like, the fact that the kids are like their parents, even though in some ways they're estranged from their parents and hate the fact that the gods are.
They didn't want to be like the parents.
Yeah, by the whims of like whatever, they control their kids' lives, or they're not there when they need them and all this stuff. But at the same time, it's kind of like this weird history repeating thing where they still are like their parents, which I think in general is a lesson to kids too, of being like, oh, you may want to rebel against your parents, but also in some ways they are a part of you.
When it comes to like personalities and stuff, like you can still like, even though like you don't want to be like your parents, you still pick up like quirks from your parents.
Yeah, exactly.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It depends on what type of quirks you're picking up. If you get like superpowers, that's great. Picking up shitty viewpoints, I'm so sorry for you.
Yeah. It's kind of a mixed bag.
It's like a real catch-22 if you think about it. But when it comes to this, I really do enjoy this because once again, I always think about how would this look visually, both in the Palace of the Mind and also like if they were to adapt this. And it can be a generally creepy thing. They're digging the graves, and even like Nico's having a fight with a ghost.
Skeletons are digging graves, which is horrifying. Like, and then he just like basically snaps his fingers and they all crumble into bones.
But here's the funny thing. I was thinking about this. It's not a plot hole, but it's like Ares can summon spooky skeletons that have died within wars. Like, does he just like outsource that from Hades? Like, hey, bro, Hades, can I like get all these spooky corpses?
That's also confusing because I feel like a lot of ancient Greek dead people did die in war, right? Like most of them.
Ares gets the best ones. The other ones died of like diseases.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like Hades gets all the ones who are just like sort of fragile
Old age,
and frail and
young,
died of like
broken heart,
whatever, consumption or old age. Yeah, exactly. Or crippling arthritis and stuff like that. And then Ares is like, oh yeah, here are all like the best warriors. So that's confusing because I mean, I don't actually know how Theseus dies. But in this, Nico summons Theseus. So I don't know how that works, actually. I didn't even think of that as like a possible plot hole.
I'm just thinking of it as probably like Hades does get to keep all of them, but Ares can like outsource them. Like, okay, can I?
Yeah, they're like subcontractors.
The freelance artists, they like to be called.
They're subterranean contractors, but
Hey-o. But I do like this scene. And you know what the sad nerdy thing is I actually had to look up. One of my favorite parts is Nico like pours like the McDonald's and stuff, and the ghost is like,
he pours one out for his homies.
He tries to get a cold one for the boys, but doesn't quite work because down here everything's hot and miserable. It was not quite cold for the boys. But
my Coca-Cola brings all the dead people to the yard, and they're like, they're all like, don't listen to the ghost. This is bad.
But what I was just saying was, my favorite part though was the ghost was like, ooh, can I have that toy? And I was like, I actually thought about it, looked at the date. I actually have an idea of probably what that toy was.
Oh, because you know like what year it was?
Yes, I'm going to take a guess and I'm going to go the comedic route, and that it is a Barbie toy. I guess it's like Barbie Summer Paris? Something like that, because it's like, I looked up like when it was, like the date of this book, what summertime of 2008 would probably be, and it was a Barbie toy.
Yeah, I honestly liked that bit of comedic like relief, even though it's from the spooky ghost who we don't know his name. And yeah, there's like some weird stuff we learn about him because long story short, Nico summons all these dead people with his weird tribute of junk food. And Theseus appears and he's talking to him, trying to find out more information about the whole like soul for a soul trading death
Eye for an
thing.
eye.
Theseus overhears the ghost and goes, "Oh, I know you." So that's a new layer. And then he's like, "No, you don't know me," which feels very like pay no attention behind to the man behind the curtain, where it's like, "Oh, well, clearly he does know you and you're hiding something, ghost. Why would you trust a ghost, first of all?" But, let's not get into that.
Remember, ghosts have their own agendas. So maybe it's someone in Theseus's history. But I like this whole interaction because once again, Nico's trying to like rationalize things. It's like, how do I get this? And the ghost is like, ask him about this, ask him about this. And Nico's not really trying to go for it. Like he's trying to figure out other ways, but he's still going to do it anyways. Like you have to go through the maze. You have to figure all these things out. Pretty much the whole point of this dream sequence is basically Nico also has to go in the maze to find his heart's desire. Luke has to go into the maze to find his heart's desire. Percy has to go into the maze to find his heart's desire. Grover has to go into the maze.
But they don't know if they'll come out alive because it's maybe the worst possible quest you could go on.
That's the whole point of like the maze is like it's like temptation for temptation's sake.
Yeah, it knows what you want, and that's why it's so dangerous.
Well, it knows what you want, and it will destroy you at every turn possible, which is a great villain.
It is. It's really fascinating. I'm really excited to see what the maze is like, but also I'm incredibly creeped out by just the premise of it. Like, I just know that there's going to be a lot of like just creepily alluring moments where it's just like the characters get tricked or trapped in some way, and that I find that much more compelling and much more creepy than say like, oh, we're just going to have like a hack and slash kind of fight with some monsters. It's much more interesting to be like, oh, there's like mirages or tricks or things like that get people turned around and confused and they get trapped there. Like that's much more interesting to me.
For me, I don't like the beginning of Percy Jackson books. I love the middle parts. Like normally it should be the opposite, right? The book should hook you in, but it's the middle towards the ending which I have the most fun with these Percy Jackson books. This one I'm really excited for because I feel like with these you could easily have like an A, B, and C story, but how when you go into the maze, like the adventures are going to be different because they can pretty much go anywhere in the United States and pop out of anywhere. But how do you like deal with that? And also, how do you deal with a maze that is designed pretty much to thwart you in your most personal sense? And I love that about this.
Yeah, I'm interested to. I'm simultaneously excited to see how the labyrinth is going to function in the
and
book,
horrified?
but also horrified. Yeah, like dreading it. Like, oh, this is going to be kind of a depressing thing.
If you want to know your characters, you're going to really know your characters once they get to the end of that corn maze.
Yeah, it's like putting them through like a gauntlet of terrible things. Basically, is the sense I'm getting.
Oh, you mean the DMV?
Like, yeah, basically, just like that.
Think of it that way. The maze is the Department of Motor Vehicles. You go through one line to get into another line, to get into another line, and oh wait, our system's down, so you're gonna have to come back tomorrow. Oh. That's the great thing about driving, but here there's no road trip. This is the first book without a road trip.
It's true. Which I'm glad about. I was kind of getting a little tired of the road trip thing, to be honest.
As much as, life is a highway, sometimes you just don't have to drive all night long.
Yeah, I mean, it's still like a traveling story, I guess, but it's not so much like there's a specific destination. They're trying to like find something within a set space.
B, this is just me using my theater background, but do you know what the story is supposed to be?
What?
The Road Less Traveled, the poem by Robert Frost.
Is it though?
No, it's not. I'm just being pretentious.
I was like, my lit degree is saying no.
My theater degree is like, yeah, if you think about it, it's like the Robert Frost poem, The Road Less Traveled.
No. Little known fact, The Road Less Traveled is about how taking the road less traveled simply by the fact that it's less traveled, so you think that it makes you more interesting to do so, isn't actually a good idea. And sometimes the road most traveled is the best way to go because people figured out over time that that was the best way to go. So it's kind of the opposite meaning of what people think it is.
And in the Lemony Snicket approach, if you go in the road less frequently traveled, you'll be eaten by a bear.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like that lesson. That's actually basically the whole point of the Robert Frost poem. But people are like, I'm going to take the road less traveled by. It's like, you didn't do your close reading, did you?
Oh no, I don't do close
Anyway,
reading.
the lit major just jumped out.
Yeah, the theater major's like, well, you see, that's a nice catchy title, so I'm going to use it rather than understanding the meaning of it.
Basically, that's sort of they're inside of you. There are two wolves. One is a lit major, one is a theater major. They're both wrong about what the road less traveled means.
And all of our teenage listeners are like, guys, get to the Percy Jackson, get to the fighting. And we're just like, yeah, let's have this philosophical debate. Oh, yes.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. We love it, though. So Percy Jackson starts to get freaked out because the exact same thing's going to happen. Like, they sense that Percy's watching them or something, or someone is watching Nico. And Percy's first idea is to slice the fountain
Is to hit it with a sword?
Percy, smash!
Yeah. Well, I think he's also just freaked out because he thinks that the monsters, or like whatever, the dead people are going to come through the fountain, because he gets like a sense their power is overwhelming, and there's like the whole cabin is shaking. Again, cut to Tyson for like the laugh line of the fact that he's still asleep through all of this. And then literally Percy just grabs it. Riptide and is just like, all right, I guess I'm gonna smash this into pieces.
Well, yeah, it would be like a comedy shot where like the whole cabin shaking, things are falling off like the ledge, things are falling from the roof, and then you cut to Tyson just sleeping, smiling,
and Tyson's just snoring. Yeah,
and I like that about this is that Percy like slices the fountain in half, and once again, old time Interruptus is like, yep, no more information this chapter. Any more information you're gonna give is gonna be withheld.
Yep. Yeah. Well, he in a way he has to interrupt himself because it's like over. I actually didn't mind that as a moment in the story because it makes sense. Like in the dream, it's because the Empusa notices his presence, and in the vision, it's because like the power of the summoning skills that Nico has, like overwhelming whatever is happening with the Iris message. And again, we still don't know why the Iris messages are going off by themselves to begin with, or maybe not by themselves, but are being summoned by like someone other than Percy.
B, do you hear that? The one philosophy major's like, in everyone's true being, there is an Interruptus.
Yeah, so that maybe the Interruptus was in you the whole time.
Maybe there's no such thing as an Interruptus. Maybe our well-being and our own morality has to interrupt things to understand the nature of the world and life as itself. Oh my God, shoot me, B. I'm turning into a philosophy major.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm getting really bad flashbacks to liberal arts college, so we need to move on.
B, I got bit by someone in a philosophy club. I'm turning quick.
You're a were philosopher. You're just howling at some books.
B, when the full moon is lit, the tie-dye shirt comes on me, and like, you gotta just pull the trigger, B. B, you don't shoot me with the silver bullet, you shoot me with gluten.
No, that's so funny. Yeah, I have to like poison your kombucha or something.
Oh man, we're like throwing shade at like hippy dippies today.
We really are.
You'll know when I'm turning when I'm like, my crystal energy is off today and I'm getting some bad vibes.
Oh God. Anyway, that whole thing happens in the night, and Percy finally wakes up Tyson and is like, hey, so
I had a nightmare.
This happened, and he's like, yeah, Percy didn't get a lot of sleep. Like that's basically Tyson's role, is explaining to everyone else why Percy looks like an exhausted, in the words of my mom when she warns me or my sister to get enough sleep, you're gonna be a raging bag of crap the next day, and that's what Percy is. He's a raging bag of crap. He's just totally exhausted, bags around his eyes, just had a whole lot to deal with that night.
I've gotten to the point in my life where I used to be able to pull all-nighters. Now if I don't get more than 6 hours of sleep, like if I get 6 hours of sleep exactly, I just feel like death the next day. I'm just like,
mm-hmm. You feel like death, like Nico and his pals.
Maybe he doesn't get any sleep at all. Maybe that's why he's all gaunt and losing his hair and looking like a Spooky Jukes emo kid.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised that Percy's not losing his hair because he doesn't ever get a night's sleep. Jesus Christ.
What if, like, just imagine if you're like a demigod that has like narcolepsy. Oh man, you're just screwed.
Yeah, you really are. And then after all of that, he still has to deal with stuff the next day and like unpack everything that happened with both the dream and the vision and prepare for his quest. And I'm just like, eek.
It's not even like preparing for his quest. It's like, well, by noon we have to be in the labyrinth. And it reminds me of like the scene reminds me of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory where they have like the big band moment where they're going to open the gates and everyone's like cheering them on and they're about to go in. But Percy's still not sure of himself and he still needs to get the help from Chiron. So he takes Chiron to the side, and this is where my head hurts. This is where like the headache of this chapter started to begin.
Because he doesn't reveal enough to him? Is that why?
No. Percy Jackson asked the wrong question.
Oh, I see.
So pretty much what ends up happening is Percy kind of explains the night before. He kind of leaves out the whole Nico part, but explains the dream with Luke.
Which is important. Percy, why?
Percy doesn't listen. They're all doomed.
Right, he's a kid. I know, we talked about it, but still.
Chiron's like, no, okay, yes. Well, I can give you some advice, and that is you better hurry up and get into that maze, because if they find Daedalus, then like Kronos will have like a super mech body.
He can have an automaton body, yeah, which is just another spooky detail, because I guess Kronos isn't really ready to command an army, and there's a whole conversation that he has with Luke in the dream where he's like, oh yeah, I'll command the troops, and then Luke is like, are you sure that you can do that?
You see, Kronos is he's still the bun's still in the oven type of situation. Like, it's just not.
Yeah, he's not quite
he's still gooey.
Prepared. And also I guess, I don't know. Well, let me read the conversation they have with Chiron, because it's kind of confusing. Because I always assumed, like, oh, his body is just going to reassemble and then he'll be able to function. But I guess he also needs...
Is it like his body's being assembled by the atom?
I guess. Maybe it's more like a Darth Vader situation where, like, he's kind of has a body but needs, like, a whole, like, exoskeleton to kind of keep his squishy bits together.
Even though the squishy bits, like, the funny thing is, like, an expanded Star Wars universe, they purposely built his suit to be not as efficient as it should be because it costs too much money. This is actual Star Wars lore.
Yeah, let me read the conversation they have. I'm not sure, but I fear they seek to make a deal with Daedalus. If the old inventor is truly alive, if he has not been driven insane by millennia in the labyrinth, well, Kronos can find ways to twist anyone to his will. I've worried for some time that Kronos may be looking for Daedalus for a different reason, not just passage through the maze. Something Annabeth and I were discussing. Do you remember what you told me about your first trip to the Princess Andromeda? The first time you saw the golden coffin? I nodded. Luke was talking about raising Kronos, little pieces of him appearing in the coffin every time someone new joined his cause. And what did Luke say they would do when Kronos has risen completely? A chill went down my spine. He said they would make Kronos a new body, worthy of the forges of Hephaestus. Indeed, Chiron said, Daedalus was the world's greatest inventor. He created the labyrinth, but much more, automatons, thinking machines. What if Kronos wishes Daedalus to make him a new form? That was a real pleasant thought. We've got to get to Daedalus first, I said, and convince him not to. So that's important.
Well, it's important because it sets up finally the motivation and why they're going into the labyrinth, even though they've already set up.
Spooky automaton filled with a titan. I'm not sure if it fully explains the whole body thing, though, because it does say his body's reassembling piece by piece, so I guess he just needs also a exoskeleton or something. I'm not sure.
Well, B, it's more like a boost that he needs. It's like just to help him a couple years or a couple more decades faster than what it needs to be. Though, here's the problem, though, B. There's so much confusion. Like, this is one part of it that's confusing, and I'll get to the other part, is that we've already had motivation to go into the labyrinth to begin with, which is said we need to get the string so they can't have this invasion, but now we have the secondary objective of we have to get to Daedalus before Luke does. I guess this is to add more urgency, but we already have motivation to begin with a completely different item, a completely probably separate part of that maze. But now we have a different part.
Yeah, there's all sorts of motivations to go into the labyrinth, which in some ways is, like, convenient because it's a quest that kind of solves everyone's desires, as you said. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind, the labyrinth, even though it's technically one location, it is a location that spans the entirety of the United States underground, and it's filled with, like, monsters and traps and, like, mental trickery that could drive people insane, basically. So it's not really as convenient as it seems on the surface.
Oh, yeah, see, and that's kind of the problem. I guess once you get the string, you can figure it out. But then again, we have too many motivations now at this point Other books have pretty much been like, we have to get to this thing at this time. Now it's just like, well, there's this one thing, but then we have to go to this thing, and then that thing, and then this thing, and then this thing.
Yeah, there's the string, there's the finding their way through the labyrinth so that way they can, like, I guess, fortify Camp Half-Blood or something.
But then we also have the catch-22 of everyone's going to have a different motivation. So, like, let's say Tyson, for some reason, is craving a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The maze might take him to a peanut butter and jelly sandwich factory. Like,
and there's Pan, too. There's a Grover looking for Pan.
There's Pan. And then there's also Annabeth, who most likely her heart's desire would be subconsciously to find Luke.
To find Luke, and also to understand the labyrinth because she's, like, obsessed with archaeology. Or not archaeology, obsessed with architecture, and, like, she's obsessed with Daedalus. That's why she's kind of the head of this entire quest to begin with, is because she's, like, been studying the labyrinth for years.
So you have, like, this problem kind of, like, I wish it was just one more concise idea of, like, we have to get the string to prevent them from even finding Daedalus, or even, like, just sealing up the tunnels or whatever it is.
Or being able to travel through the labyrinth, because without the string you can't do that. There's a lot of questions. Also, Theseus mentioned something about the labyrinth.
What did he say about the labyrinth?
He says that it's not just the string, it's the love of a mortal.
Oh,
when he's talking to, when he's talking to Nico, which made me think, what mortal do we know who sees magic? Rachel Elizabeth Dare. So is she going to be involved somehow? Is she going to help them through the labyrinth? I feel like she must appear again. She came up in the beginning of this book, and I feel like they're not going to just disappear her.
I'm just thinking, like, they, like, hop out of the labyrinth, like, snatch her up, almost like the people underneath the stairs type of situation.
Oh god, that's horrifying.
And they're like, oh, you have to work for us now. And she's like, oh, I've been here the entire time. You see, this is where I hide all my bodies for all the people that I've murdered. Oh my god, secretly she's a serial killer.
Right, yeah. She hides her numerous corpses in the labyrinth. An incredibly creepy prospect. So yeah, there's just a lot to be found in the labyrinth. I'm interested to see how everyone goes about getting what they need, I guess.
I'm interested as well, but then there's another problem with this whole conversation that maybe this is just me being, like, logical. Percy's pretty much like, hey, Chiron, I have another favor to ask for you. Can you, like, fortify the defenses and stuff? But you know what he doesn't ask him to do? Because we already got another piece of information in this chapter. Do you know what it is?
What?
What do you think would be the most pressing matter at camp at this moment once Percy and all of them leave?
To protect camp, I imagine, right?
Yes, but we've already got a new piece of information that was apparent in this chapter, which is even addressed later on also in this.
I'm trying to pick up what you're putting down, but I'm not sure what you're talking about.
There are spies amongst them.
Oh, right, yes, the spies thing, too, yeah, totally. Well, he brings that up a little bit. He kind of mentions not trusting Quintus.
But that's just one person. There could be other spies. It could be a whole spy network.
And then Chiron is like, yeah, I don't trust him also, but I invited him, which is another ill-advised thing, to be honest.
It's like inviting Mad-Eye Moody in Goblet of Fire.
Yeah, it's like keep your enemies close. I understand the concept kind of, but it's like, it's very funny that he's like, oh yeah, I know that Quintus is kind of like weird and suspicious, but anyway.
Well, that's why you do it, but then there's also the thing about, there could be Quintus could be the spy, but also that could just be a red herring.
Anybody could be the spy.
So
yeah.
Why doesn't Chiron, like, try to weed out the spies? Like, maybe you give them everyone, like, you bring everyone, like, into an interview and, like, hey, I really trust you a lot. I'm going to give you this piece of information that's bogus, and you give it to different people, like, different types of, like, weird information, and you'll find out.
Right, you'll know who the spy is based on the information. Yeah, I could see that.
Like, you could do, like, that. Wouldn't that be one of the more pressing issues? That means you also, not only do you have a spy, but you could also have a saboteur.
Yeah, like a double agent situation.
Do you know how the magic border works, right?
I mean, I don't know the specific mechanism. Do they mention that at all, or what do you mean by that?
So how it works is you can invite people into the camp.
Oh, right, yeah.
So you just have, like, a conga line of, like, monsters. Hey, come in, come in, come in, come in, come in, come in, come in.
Wait, in which case then it doesn't matter that they
right,
found an entrance in the center of camp, because then they could just have one person and then...
You just need one person to, like, mess it up.
Wait, if that's true, then why can Percy's mom not go through the barrier?
They've kind of established it where, like, if you can invite people in, because Percy can invite monsters in because he invited Tyson in, or I guess Annabeth did.
Oh, I guess, yeah, you're right. I never thought of that.
See, once again, this is why, like, me being logical, like, you can see the scaffolding a little bit. Like, no offense, like Rick Riordan, but there's like those just little things you notice. But also, I was just thinking about this. I'm sure someone has like an answer. Well, technically, immortals can't come in, or can they? Or if they're special, or whatever.
I
whatever
guess,
it is,
yeah,
because
you're right. I never thought of that. Like someone like Rachel Elizabeth Dare.
or Percy's mom, because she can also see monsters.
Right, yeah, like one of those special mortals.
But you see what I'm getting at here is there's more problems than just
the labyrinth entrance.
there's problems on the home front. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And that's where Percy should have been like, hey, while I'm gone, Chiron, you need to figure out who the spy is. Even if it could be Quintus, but also they've kind of already established that it could be a kid. Because he even brought it up in Sea of Monsters that they're spies at camp before Quintus.
Well, what's his name was a spy? Chris Rodriguez, yeah, before he was driven mad by the labyrinth.
So there could be more spies, there could be less spies, or we have Quintus, who just seems like out of all of them, hi everybody, I'm normal American man. I'm Hugh Man.
Hugh Man. Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, he like walks up to kids. Oh boy, do I like hanging out with kids. Do you know any structural issues with the camp?
Hello, fellow kids.
Oh, he's like Steve Buscemi, like walking up with like
yeah,
a
exactly.
skateboard.
He's like holding a skateboard. Like, I am a normal child. Can you please tell me the weakest part of Camp Half-Blood?
1 second, I gotta yeet out of here. He like moonwalks.
He like does an ollie, but like falls.
I'm just it's like either that or like he's like almost like robotic. He just has like a robot of himself. Hello, kids. I am teenage boy. Ha ha.
I am 15 years old. Do you like mytho magic?
And they're like, hey, why did you like look like 80 years old? I'm from Arizona.
It is very warm there.
Joking aside, like, yes, the plot and the plan is fine and dandy. Like, there's just small things. If you notice it, you're just like, wait a second, that doesn't make no sense. And that's kind of how the chapter ends, with like a big old triumphant thing of them going into Labyrinth, and then there's just straight up darkness.
Yeah. It's very sad and interesting the way that they end, because it's Grover who hates Underground saying, but goodbye, sunshine, and then Tyson saying, hello, rocks.
Great comedy, great comedy. So B, what is the name of the next chapter?
The name of the next chapter is We Meet the God with Two Faces. That's horrifying.
So you're telling me one of them tells the truth and the other one tells lies?
Who's a god with two faces? I have no idea. I don't know enough about mythology.
There's nothing scarier than a person with two faces. You know, the last time a kid went into a spooky dungeon and saw two faces? One of them was Voldemort.
I was gonna say, is it Voldemort? That's the only thing I'm thinking of is Voldemort. Or like the two-headed dragon Zack and Wheezy from Dragon Tales. Those are the two things that are coming to mind.
So it could be both literally or figuratively, but most likely in Greek mythology, it's usually literally.
Or like duplicitous, yeah, it could just be like, oh, I'm lying to you, which is also a thing.
Or he's Harvey Dent. He's actually Two-Face. Can he be trusted?
He would have to be a lesser, or we're assuming it's a he also, which we don't know that, but the god would have to be like a lesser god because they met most of the gods already, the major gods in like the pantheon of gods at Mount Olympus, so it wouldn't be one of the ones they've already met because they meet him, it's like, or them, or she, whoever it is, in this chapter, so it's not someone we've met before. Would it be Pan? Is Pan going to be who they're going to meet? Is Pan like a liar or something?
That would be the quickest joke ever in the world.
I know. I'd be like, no way do they meet Pan that quickly.
That seems like a middle of the book type of thing, or like at the end of the book. So maybe we might find something else. Maybe Quill will be down there, and it's actually like they interrupt that whole battle from the Philosopher's Stone, because remember, time works differently down here. It could be 1991 for all we know. Oh, sorry, are we interrupting anything? Ooh. Oh, so good for an interrupt us, and we'll take that Philosopher's Stone too. Bye! I'm excited for the next chapter. There isn't really much to talk about it. We'll figure it out next week, won't we?
Yeah, I can't guess much about what's going to happen in the next chapter because I can't guess who the god is going to be. But it's going to be spooky, whatever it is, because it's going to be underground.
Spooky Dukes. So, B, do you want to read some messages this week?
Hi, Zack and B. My name is Talita. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. I am 21 and I love your show. I just discovered it a few weeks ago and it's my favorite podcast. I love the way you analyze the book in such detail, the hilarious tangents you end up on without realizing, and the pop culture references. I particularly love the Star Trek reference in episode 53 about the tricorders. I'm a Star Trek fan and I find that so relatable since tricorders are constantly being used for things other than their original purpose. Speaking of Star Trek, in the future books, you will meet Will Solace, and he reminds me so much of Dr. McCoy from Star Trek. I look forward to hearing your opinion on this in the future. I love the Percy Jackson series so much because it helped me come to terms with being bisexual, since Rick writes about the LGBT community in an understanding and supportive way and encouraged me to come out to my friends and family. Oh, that's really good.
That's really nice.
It also helped me become more accepting of my disability and how it affects me. Tyson in particular really resonates with me as a person as he eventually finds people who care about him despite him being a Cyclops. Keep up the good work. What a nice email. That's really nice.
I really do enjoy emails like this, especially when they talk about Star Trek. But even like bringing up Star Trek a little bit with this is, I love emails like this where, hey, Percy Jackson helped you in this way and helped you in that way.
It's the purpose of, there's a lot of purposes of the book series, but I get the sense that it's on the forefront of Rick Riordan's mind when he's writing that he wants to make people feel supported and represented and encouraged, whether they're different in one way or another, whether they're LGBT or they're disabled or whatever. Like, the main character, all of the demigods have ADHD and dyslexia, so it's like definitely you get the sense that he wants to, make kids who typically feel like different or alienated that they shouldn't feel that way, that they should feel good about themselves, and that makes me happy. That's why I feel so good discussing these books and focusing on these books, because it comes from a very generous, thoughtful place.
When it comes to Rick Riordan, I think he writes everything within good intentions. Much like in Star Trek, I believe, like with the Gene Roddenberry approach of, in Gene Roddenberry's mind, in the future, everyone's going to get along. There's not going to be any prejudice. There's not going to be any racism. People are working together pretty much in harmony. And when it comes to Rick Riordan's very much the same way, in how it doesn't matter who you are or, how you are as a person. You are a person and you have, your quirks, you have your flaws, you have, your loves and your hates, like most people. And I really do enjoy that about Percy Jackson a lot, is because it doesn't like put everything like, I'm typical American normal boy. I have normal boy problems like getting zits and stuff.
Which is also not even necessarily true, like just because people act like the default is someone who isn't disabled, someone who isn't LGBT, like whatever, doesn't necessarily mean that is true. Like, the world is diverse, the people are diverse, so it's much more realistic to represent people that way. So I'm glad that Rick Riordan is like aware of that representation wise.
That's one of the most important things about it, is because like in most book series of this time, mostly it's like, oh no, I have this date with this girl and I have a zit, and we're all white people for some weird reason.
Yeah, exactly. We're all like white, able-bodied, straight people, and it's like, that's not true to reality. And like, how does that make kids reading that feel if they don't relate to that kind of person?
Though sometimes there are books and stuff like Star Wars or like even like Harry Potter where like sometimes you can ignore that and like, put your own twist to it.
Well, also, Harry Potter's a little bit different because it has like metaphorical differences that aren't necessarily tracked to the real world, but instead it's like, oh, he's marginalized because he's a werewolf or whatever. And you can unpack whether or not that's like the best metaphor to go with, but still it has a similar kind of lesson. A lot of YA books do.
That's a little different because it's also like those books are from like 20 years ago, so things have like moved past that type of thing, much like the Josh Whedon approach of things.
Right. It's like you were woke at the time, but things have... Yeah, identity politics have become more complicated, and mapping that on maybe isn't always great. You could even talk about that with Tyson, too. We have, where it's like, he's sort of a metaphor for disabled people, but he's also a metaphor for, like, people who face racism, too, which is where it's, like, interestingly, he's marginalized, but it doesn't map very neatly onto one specific identity that exists in the real world.
If you aren't like reading these books with like your eyes closed, like, well, I see what Rick Riordan's doing here, but let's see how this goes. Let's see how this plays out. And it works. It actually does gel. Like, there are some books where it's like the equivalent to that is like sticking like a circle through a square peg, and you're just like, doesn't quite work. Please just stop doing that. We get the whole point. You're trying to check off a box so your publishers are happy. And here it's different because with Rick Riordan, even like his later books, like he does bring up things and he does talk about like different issues and he tries to understand them. And when he doesn't have the answers, he gives it to the next person. That's why he does Rick Riordan presents like, hey, I can't really represent every culture because that means I have to spend years, decades researching it. I'm going to give it to someone that already knows all this stuff, has done all the legwork, and has a chance to actually show those books off. And I can present them because I have all this money that I'm going to use to present it in a much different way.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely have in the past sort of lifted up how great Rick Riordan is at like representation, being mindful of the way that he talks about certain kinds of people and understanding his limitations and saying, oh, I should outsource this to someone who knows better. And I think that takes like a lot of like self-reflection. Like, yeah, he's honest about like maybe he won't be the best person to tell the specific story, but he also understands that maybe that story is important to tell. So that's a nice change from a certain other YA author that we're not gonna specifically put on blast, but you know who you are.
Oh, you mean the one that I'm going to on Wednesday because I'm going to the Wizarding World for my birthday? Oh yeah, that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, is she gonna be there?
If she does, it'd be the most awkward conversation to ever have in my life.
Do you know the Wizarding World ride where you just like go into a booth and J.K. Rowling like tells you a headcanon? Or I guess it's canon. Yeah, she just whispers in your ear like a weird thing about Hagrid and you're like, what? And then you leave and that's the ride.
You walk into the booth and you pay like $60 and she like, it's almost like a Zoltar machine of her. I feel like if she wouldn't be there, it'd just be a Zoltar machine of her.
And it just prints out, yeah, and it's just her like face moving. That's actually extremely funny. I wish that someone would design that.
Like the card gets spit out and it's like the card that says, and Hagrid hated animals and was secretly a vegan. Another $60, please.
It's like, wait, what?
Like what?
I mean, I could actually see Hagrid being a vegan, but I couldn't see him hating animals. But that's why I could see him being a vegan.
That's canon now. So thanks again for that lovely message. We have one that says, an explanation and the real villain. So this is from Emily. Emily here. I kind of got behind a little on the podcast, but I've caught up, and I may have some explanation for Annabeth. Granted, it doesn't excuse all of the odd characteristics she's been given. As a person with ADHD myself, when it comes to social interactions and personal relationships, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes regarding those situations. Annabeth, having ADHD, probably has a lot in common issues with me and other people with ADHD. One of these things is that we struggle with social minute. For instance, little details can go right over our heads and we can read into them too much, and we also have a very bad reaction to them when it comes to potential rejection. Even if it's a little sense, for example, Percy hanging out with Rachel, even briefly, isn't a blatant sign of rejection. However, Annabeth, it may be interpreted differently. For a lot of ADHD people, we have odds emotional bonds, and people that we feel are constantly under attack by small things, such as hanging out with someone else. Our brains have this weird hardwiring to jump into conclusions that may seem stupid to others, but seem logical to us. I don't know if it's explaining the technicalities of the terms very well, but there are some fancy scientific names for what I'm talking about. Not to mention a lot of ADHD people also have other mental issues and go with it. Annabeth also seems like a person that's pretty anxious under certain pressure, especially under personal relationships. This sort of thing can also help explain why/how she's reached the way she did with her father. The internalization rejection may have been more severe to her than it was for an external appearance. Anyway, I'm not particularly the best at explaining these things, and I hope it's somewhat coherent. The only thing that is really in this explanation for Annabeth's current characterizations is that I feel that it should have been expressed more in other books. Now, to wrap up this email, I have a present. She sent us Interruptus. This is the person that sent us
who made Interruptus. I love Interruptus. It's great. We should make that like our cover photo or something on Twitter. I think it's hilarious.
That one's pretty good. I love that. Thank you, Emily, for that lovely email.
I hadn't even thought of that aspect. And the thing is like, I don't necessarily think that Rick Riordan was trying to display like ADHD symptoms because like you said it's the characterization isn't like consistent with the way Annabeth acted before, so maybe if he had shown that previously it would have like connected more to her general personality. But I do like that as like a headcanon explanation because it makes the book more interesting and better. So good on you for pointing that out. Yeah, I had actually heard of that phrase before. I think the medical um phrase that she was referring to in the email is rejection sensitive dysphoria, which basically says is a form of mental illness where a person may experience severe emotional sensitivity and emotional pain. Generally, this means that people with ADHD will perceive a situation negatively when in reality the situation may not aim to cause them emotional pain, which actually sounds a lot like Annabeth, especially in the first couple chapters of this book. So even though that I don't necessarily want to give Rick Riordan credit for specifically like connecting that to why Annabeth was acting that way, I think it was closer to like, oh, she's just like a hormonal pubescent girl or whatever. I find that explanation more interesting, so I'm just going to choose to believe it.
See, it's one of those dangerous paths that you can take where you can take something like someone does bring us like a theory or something, and it's like, oh, it kind of fits into all these pegs. Like, oh, that must be it. Not to say that there is anything wrong with it, because I actually kind of agree with this. I actually think this is a much better explanation than like, oh my god, Annabeth's a hormone monster and hates people, and all she wants to do all day is cry and eat ice cream. Like, that's also not a good like way of thinking when it comes to it. But it's a unique thing, like when people bring different thoughts about Annabeth, because it really does show that she is more of a three-dimensional character than most people that are written in books. Because people do obviously care about Annabeth and her, like her well-being, and I really do enjoy when it comes to like talking about these theories, especially with this one about ADHD. It's like you can see it from a different perspective. Like, oh, things make sense again. And especially going back to our previous email about that is like, oh yeah, people might be different and they have all these different problems that aren't normally like I have the big dance tonight, but my car's broken, so I have to do said thing and all these things, and I love you. Rather than here just like, oh, Annabeth doesn't quite understand, like, because she's not wired in the way of like understanding like a not like a normal like human being, because there's no such thing really as a normal human
As
being all that much.
like a neurotypical kid or whatever.
I guess, yeah, that's the word I'm looking for here. But yeah, it's the exact same type of thing. Like, we're dealing with people that also have superpowers, so things are affected. But also, we also have the actual goddess of love, so she could be playing a part. Or we have like all these little things like cooks in the kitchen that could be different explanations.
Right. There could be a lot of different headcanons or explanations or reasons as to why she's acting the way she's acting. But I like that idea. That email was really interesting because it hadn't occurred to me that that was an explanation. But it's like something that makes sense to me as like a character explanation.
This is one of the reasons why we open up our emails to people, is because we might not have all the answers. Trust me, I'm not the smartest person in the world. Like, a lot of the stuff that we talk about sometimes gets edited out because we might be saying something wrong, and sometimes I'll go back and fact check it before we sound like complete doofuses. And it just kind of shows that we're all human, and that's why I love having our emails, because some people can bring in new thoughts rather than us, because we might like get on like a weird train like Spies and Camp Half-Blood and like go off the rails to the point of where we're not really thinking about it like rationally, or someone that's like has read these books so many times, like, well, there's actually an explanation this way and this, and that's kind of like one of the detriments to like reading a chapter at a time. And that's why I love seeing these emails that talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, that was great. I love those kind of emails like that where someone's just thinking completely from a different perspective. That like I had heard of that concept before, and I was confused by Annabeth's behavior, but I hadn't like connected the dots that they could be related. So that was really cool. So we got another email from Madison, who says, "Hello, Zack and B. I found your podcast in January and started listening right away. Love how you really break down each chapter and bring up things I never thought about. Annabeth is my favorite character, and because I've been reading these for so long, it's hard to recognize when she makes mistakes because I only remember all the successes that she has. That being said, my understanding is that she treats Rachel like that because she is used to keeping everything a secret. Annabeth has very few mortals in her life that know the truth. Also, I hope you read the short stories from the Demigod Files, I hope you read the short stories from the Demigod Files. There are like 4 that happen between Battle of the Labyrinth and The Last Olympian. I think they would also help answer some character building questions. Also, there is one in particular, The Sword of Hades, that has a great character arc for all those involved. Also, the Bronze Dragon short story is a must-read before Heroes of Olympus. Anyway, thanks for an amazing podcast. That's another interesting thing, too, is there's other, like, supplementary materials that we haven't read that might add to characterization reasons.
Yes, that's the cool thing about Rick Riordan is he does do short stories. Like I said before, some of them are very fan fiction-y, but a lot of them, do further the plot. But then there's like this weird thing. It's like, I guess because he's technically written, it's all canon. So when do we read it? When do we not? I have to like look at one of those weird like Star Wars timelines. Like one of the things that I hate about like watching the Clone Wars, because I watched it years ago, was everything that George Lucas did was every episode of that is technically out of order, and there's like a special timeline you have to watch it in for it to make a lick of sense. Or you can watch it by itself, and it's like all the episodes take place in different times during the war, and I like it when things are just like you open up the book and it just has like a recommendation list of what you need to read,
Like
when
what
you should
order,
read
yeah.
it. Yeah, and I like that type of stuff, and we'll get to it. We just have to decide.
Yeah, I also like that, we've been talking for a while about Annabeth's characterization and the whole thing with Rachel, and I like that there's different explanations that we've been getting in the emails. Like in this case, it's more has to do with her getting angry that Percy is sort of sharing this aspect of his life with a mortal, and I guess I could see why she'd feel threatened by that. And again, that's like not even something that I was thinking too much about as like a motivation for her anger. Like it seemed more like she was angry that he was like supposedly flirting with her or supposedly like with a girl. Like would she have been as angry if it was a male mortal that he was hanging out with that wasn't necessarily like perceived as romantic by her? I'm not sure.
Well, then that goes back to teen romance. That's kind of the problem about that, is it defaults back to we need more drama, so we're going to have this girl here. And yeah, like I understand like the points that come across when it comes to like talking about Annabeth, but at the end of the day, there are a lot of good theories, but the person that has the best theory is Rick Riordan, who wrote it. And it can be a fine line to walk when it comes to it, because we talk about this, like we even notice it very quickly, like this makes no sense. And it seems like a change for something to add drama, but maybe there's a reason for it. This weird thing about Rick Riordan is there's always a reason for something. And even there's a great thing about this is that when it comes to characters that you love and you kind of put on a pedestal like Annabeth, and it's almost like a two-way street, like we can help people with different perceptions of things. Like we realize that Annabeth isn't just a person that is always good at everything. Like she isn't a Mary Sue by any stretch of the imagination.
Right, she has flaws that might not have its logic to it. Maybe she is acting irrationally, and maybe that's fine. It's fine for someone to act irrationally because she's a person.
And it's interesting to see, like, you see, like, probably, like, bullet points of, like, all the cool things she does, but then people forget to put all the flaws that she has. And that's what makes, like, a really well-dimensional 3D character, which is Annabeth, who she has a lot of great quirks to her, but then she also has good flaws to her, which, she tries to conquer throughout the story. It isn't just one book. She has a character arc where she's, like, racist, because that's something that happens, but you have things like she has a problem with trusting people. She has a problem with like letting go of the past, letting it die. She has all these complicated feelings, and I do enjoy that about Annabeth. She is one of my favorite characters for that reason, other than chick with knife and awesome and blonde and all these things like that. That don't do anything for me. It's all about the actions rather than the appearance for me. B, did we get any iTunes reviews this week?
So yeah, we got another iTunes review this week from the Percy Jackson Geek, who said, "I love this podcast. Dear Zack and B, I love this podcast from the very beginning. Both of you are so funny, especially B. No offense, Zack."
Oh man, that's okay.
That's so funny. When they try to predict what happens next, today I pulled out my copy of Percy Jackson the Lightning Thief. Even though you criticize the book in some ways, both of you have a point. TTFN. Smiley face.
But I think that's pretty much all we had to talk about today, B. Anything else you want to bring up?
Not sure. I don't think so. Do you have any advice for our listeners?
Yes. If you want to root out a spy, you give bogus information to people in different ways.
That's actually really good advice. It's pretty clever.
Well, you have to be clever to root out a spy. Though I was like thinking about this, like how would Chiron do it? Like we'd have to intercept all the iris messages and really have like a real dictatorship to like do it. But no, there's clever ways of doing it. Not you don't have to monitor calls. You just have to figure out ways of dealing with kids and kids' logic if it's a kid. Or if it's Quintus, it's like the easiest. You're like, Quintus, you have to be with me the entire time. Hop on my back, weird man-child.
Let us ride into the sunset. I think my advice is I had it and then it escaped through my fingers. And now I don't know. Oh, I guess like just be honest with people. I think that that's like a good lesson. Like if you're hiding something because you think it's better for everybody to hide something, it's probably not. It's best to be honest to people. I think.
Hey, buddy, you want to hop on the tire swing? We can like talk about it. Really like mesh it over.
Because I especially when you're young, I think there is the idea of like, oh no, if I hide this from an authority figure, it's just better. But if you're dealing with a reasonable person, it's probably for the best to share that thing, especially if it's something dangerous, like the fate of the world or
burning your house down.
Yes, exactly. You dropped a match on a carpet. Don't hide those things.
Is your dad gonna come back and like lecture me about fire safety now?
Yeah, the spirit of my dad, like Mufasa, is going to travel back in time to when you were 3 and yell at you.
I mean, he's petty enough to do that.
Oh, yeah. I got so many lectures. It was so many.
I'm guessing most of it's like, you gotta get the lint out of the dryer.
It was that. It was like, don't play with candles, don't like leave the stove on, always check the stove. Like, basically don't go near anything that produces heat at all until you're like 15. That was kind of the lesson.
Well, B, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at bkellygorman and on Tumblr at twinpoetry.tumblr.com.
If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at Suda41. That's at SUDA41. If you want to follow our show on Twitter, that's at halfblood_radio. And if you want to follow my new show, The Film Cultist, the podcast where I try to find, gems in the celluloid, it is The Film Cultist. This week I did a rock musical vampire movie that was so bad it was great. I loved it. It was called I Kissed a Vampire. Oh, man. That I could talk about that for days. But we also have a Patreon/Radio Camp Half-Blood. Those pins will be coming out soon. I'm giving another extra days to get all the addresses because we're missing one. But once that comes in...
and then we're able to ship them out. I'm very excited to finish them up. It's going to be really cool. I kind of love making the merch pins. They're a very fun, meticulous process in designing them and stuff.
They're so cool that I don't even have seen them yet or have any of them. But that's okay. I will be surprised when they pop up at someone's random house and we send pictures.
I'll send you a picture when they're done.
No, I want someone to send me a picture. I don't want you to send me a picture. I want to be
you just want it to be a surprise when people post pictures of them?
Yes.
Okay.
That's all I want to see in life. I want to see the pure joy of someone's face when they rip open that package and see that they got the pin or they got the wrong pin. Wait a second, this is an unfortunate associate's pin.
Yeah, wait, this is an eye. No, yeah, I think all of those are gone because the backup ones that I had of those, the weird clear coat that I applied to them got sticky and then they fused together and that wasn't fun.
Womp womp.
But they're gone now, so I don't have any extras of the unfortunate associates pins.
Well, B, I'm Zach.
I'm B.
And keep staying mortal. Bye.
Bye, guys.